One question from Lions fans sparked a discussion that says a lot about how this team is viewed heading into the new season, and it all starts with one name, Jared Goff. There is still a surprising amount of debate around where he belongs among NFL quarterbacks, but when you really look at everything he has accomplished and the consistency he has shown, it's becoming much harder to argue against him being the best quarterback in the NFC North right now. The argument is simple. At this moment, Jared Goff sits at the top of the division. Behind him comes Jordan Love, followed by Caleb Williams, while J.J. McCarthy remains lower because there are still too many unanswered questions surrounding his development. Of course, that order could change as the season unfolds. Caleb Williams has enormous upside, especially now that he continues developing, while Jordan Love still has plenty to prove after an inconsistent stretch. But today, based on experience, production, and reliability, Goff deserves that #1 spot. Looking beyond the NFC North, the conversation becomes even more interesting. No one is claiming that Jared Goff is Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, or Joe Burrow in terms of pure athletic ability. Those quarterbacks possess unique physical gifts that very few players can match. But football isn't played only on highlight reels. Availability matters. Consistency matters. Being able to stand in the pocket, read defenses, distribute the football, and show up every single week matters. Those are qualities that often get overlooked when people rank quarterbacks. Goff has continued proving that he can lead an offense efficiently while remaining one of the league's most dependable starters. While some elite quarterbacks have dealt with significant injuries over the years, Goff has built his reputation on being available and giving his team stability every Sunday. That doesn't automatically make him more talented than every superstar quarterback, but it certainly strengthens his overall value. That's why placing him somewhere around 7th or 8th among all NFL quarterbacks is a reasonable position based on what he has consistently delivered. Another question that continues circulating among fans involves potential trades before the season begins. One name that came up was Alex Highsmith. On paper, adding another talented pass rusher always sounds appealing, but when you examine Detroit's current roster construction, making that move simply doesn't appear to fit what the organization is trying to accomplish. The Lions already have confidence in the players they've assembled. DJ Wonnum is part of the rotation, Derek Moore was added through the draft, and the front office clearly believes in developing the talent already inside the building. Trading valuable draft capital for a player like Highsmith doesn't match the patient philosophy this organization has followed. If Detroit makes a significant trade later in the season, it would likely happen closer to the trade deadline after the team has a better understanding of where the roster needs reinforcement. At this stage, there is little indication that another major pass rusher is considered a necessity. That leads into another important discussion. What position could the Lions realistically add before training camp? The answer is probably not a starting position. The starting lineup is essentially set. If additions happen, they will almost certainly be about improving depth rather than replacing starters. Cornerback stands out as one of the areas where adding another experienced player could make sense, especially after losing some depth. That doesn't mean signing someone expected to immediately start. It simply means bringing in another reliable option who can strengthen the rotation throughout camp. The same idea applies to defensive end or linebacker. Detroit could easily add another veteran simply to increase competition and provide insurance if injuries occur during camp. Those would be practical roster moves rather than headline-grabbing acquisitions. The Lions have shown repeatedly that they value depth throughout the roster, and camp additions are often designed with that long-term philosophy in mind instead of making splashy signings. Another major topic centered around playoff expectations, and the confidence surrounding this year's team is noticeably higher. The belief is that Detroit not only returns to the postseason, but actually wins the NFC North. That confidence comes from several factors working together. The roster appears stronger than it was a year ago. The schedule also looks more manageable compared to last season. On top of that, there is optimism surrounding offensive coordinator Drew Petzing and the direction of the offense moving forward. When all those pieces are combined, the expectation rises from last year's 9-win season to potentially reaching 11 victories this year. That kind of improvement would almost certainly put the Lions back in playoff position. The NFC North itself remains one of the toughest divisions in football, but there are legitimate questions surrounding each rival. Minnesota still faces uncertainty at quarterback. Green Bay has talent but also inconsistency. Chicago has improved but still has to prove it on the field. Meanwhile, Detroit enters the season with continuity, experience, and a roster that appears capable of competing every single week. That's exactly why expectations are climbing. The conversation is no longer about whether this team belongs among the contenders. The conversation has shifted toward whether this group can capitalize on the opportunity in front of them and finally establish itself as the clear team to beat in the division. But here's the biggest question of all. Do you agree that the Detroit Lions should be considered the favorite to win the NFC North? Or do you believe another team has a stronger case heading into the season? The conversation also turned toward one topic that always generates strong opinions every offseason: whether the Lions should consider trading players before the regular season begins. The answer was interesting, because it wasn't about moving established starters at all. Instead, the focus was entirely on players who may not survive the final 53-man roster. If there's an opportunity to turn someone who isn't expected to make the team into a late-round draft pick, even a conditional selection, that's simply good business. Rather than losing a player for nothing, Detroit could potentially gain future draft capital while clearing roster space. But when it comes to moving core contributors or starters, that idea was dismissed immediately. The expectation is that this coaching staff believes in the group they've assembled, and there is no indication they want to weaken the roster before the season even begins. Another subject that often divides fans is preseason football. Every August, people celebrate wins or panic over losses, but there's a very different way of looking at those games. The final score simply doesn't matter. Whether Detroit finishes the preseason undefeated or loses every exhibition game, none of those results determine what will happen once the regular season begins. What actually matters is evaluating situations. Coaches want to see how young players respond under pressure. They want backup quarterbacks handling difficult drives. They want rookies competing in meaningful situations that can prepare them for real NFL football. This is the perfect opportunity to test aggressive fourth-down decisions, unusual formations, and game situations that coaches might hesitate to try during meaningful games. Those are the lessons that carry value into September, not whether the scoreboard says 24-17 or 17-14 when the clock reaches zero. That mindset says a lot about where Detroit currently stands as an organization. They're no longer a rebuilding team looking for confidence through preseason victories. They're a contender using August to prepare for January. Looking ahead to the regular season, one matchup immediately stands above the rest as the most anticipated game on the schedule. While opening week always brings excitement because football finally returns, the spotlight quickly shifts to week 2 when the Lions travel to face the Buffalo Bills. There are several reasons this game feels enormous. Buffalo will be opening its stadium for its home crowd, creating one of the most electric environments of the season. Ticket prices have already reflected that excitement, and the atmosphere is expected to be incredible. It has a similar feeling to Detroit opening against Kansas City a few years ago, when nearly everyone expected the home team to come away victorious. Many people will likely predict Buffalo to win simply because of the environment and the emotion surrounding that home opener. But Detroit has consistently battled the Bills extremely well. Even though Buffalo has won the last 3 meetings, every game has been highly competitive. That history makes this matchup feel like much more than just another regular season contest. There's even a sense that this game could become an early Super Bowl preview if both teams perform the way many expect them to this season. If the Lions walk into Buffalo and come away with a victory, it would immediately send a message to the rest of the NFL that Detroit belongs among the league's true elite teams. The discussion then shifted toward one of the toughest parts of every training camp: predicting surprise roster decisions. Every year, a few unexpected names either fail to make the team or unexpectedly earn a spot, and this season appears no different. One player mentioned as a possible surprise cut was Dominic Lovett. Circumstances around the roster have changed because of injuries, and other players have begun creating additional competition at different positions. Nothing is guaranteed until the final roster is announced, and that makes every preseason snap important. Another name that would truly shock people if released is Amon-Ra St, assuming he remains healthy. His talent makes him someone most fans expect to stay on the roster, so seeing him become a surprise cut would certainly be unexpected. Levi Onwuzurike was also mentioned as another player whose release would catch many people off guard, although that scenario is not viewed as likely. On the opposite side of the discussion was the question of surprise players who could actually make the roster. One name stood out immediately: Giovanni Manu. The expectation here is actually the opposite. It would be surprising if he survives final cuts. The reasoning is straightforward. Detroit has assembled significant competition along the offensive line. Larry Borom, Miles Frazier, Drew Scruggs, Christian Mahogany, Ben Barch, and Colby Sorsdahl all provide competition across multiple positions. With that much depth already available, finding room for Giovanni Manu becomes increasingly difficult. The reality is that the competition across this roster is becoming much stronger than in previous years. Players who may have comfortably made the team a season ago now have to fight for every single roster spot. That's exactly what successful organizations want. Competition raises the overall level of the football team, and it forces every player to earn his place instead of relying on reputation. As trainers